Welcome back to a crazy little thing called Thought Podcast with me, your host, Luke Richardson. This is episode 3, Consciousness Can Alleviate Anxiety. Now, before I begin, if you're hearing a lot of rumbling in the background, this podcast recording, it's because my kid's hamster has just decided to, it's 5:30 in the morning while I record this, and my kid's hamster has just decided to, make as much noise as he wants to. So yeah, if you're hearing rumbling in the background, don't be alarmed. It's just my kid's hamster just creating some special effects in the background, shall we say? So where were we? Oh yeah. So episode 3, Consciousness Can Alleviate Anxiety, on a crazy little thing called Thought Podcast by me, Luke Richardson. Now, I explained on the previous podcast recording, the previous video, that we are thinking beings, we are thinking creatures. So yeah, we've got that. We think, but we're also conscious. And we can prove that in this discussion. That without consciousness, you can't tell you're alive. You can't have an experience of listening to this audio recording or watching this YouTube video. You can't have an experience of going to work, and you can't have an experience going out to a meal at a fancy restaurant without having consciousness. So what do we mean by understanding consciousness? Well, if you as an individual understand that you think and that you are a conscious being, then you understand that your experience is fluid, is temporary, is never fixed. So when your level of consciousness rises, your understanding rises, then it's a game changer for you, because what tends to happen when people develop that more and more is that their anxious experience, it doesn't necessarily go away, but you understand what it is. That it's just a temporary illusion that's, going to change. The reason why people get so anxious is because they don't understand the relationship between themselves and their thinking. They have anxious thoughts. They take them rather seriously, like, oh, this needs fixing, and they do more thinking about it, which just aggravates the issue that they're experiencing. And people will think it's something that's going on in the outside world. It's not. It's just their thinking of the outside world. And if you've got anxious thinking, or someone's got anxious thinking, and you're thinking about it, and you're doing more thinking about it, how can I stop this? What's wrong with me? What will people think about me? And so on and so on. So you're building all these onion skin layers of thinking. It's just heading to a one-way ticket to burnout and, a mental breakdown. Whereas if someone has anxious thinking, just goes, oh, it's just that again. That'll go in a few hours, or a few minutes, or it will change when it changes. That kind of blasé attitude about it. You develop a better relationship with the anxious thinking, and that alleviates it. It gets weaker. It gets weaker because you understand what it is. It doesn't necessarily stop it ever coming, but it gets weaker. That's huge. That's a massive thing to understand and know. And there's a simplicity about that, but we face complexity with it because of how we've been brought up. Cast your mind back to when you were a child at school. From kindergarten or nursery ages, or primary elementary school, you got told by the teachers. It's not their fault, by the way. Before I go into this, that's the way the training was taught, the way they've been brought up. the way the system has taught them. So that's all they understood. But from the get go, we were told when we were younger, you better be thinking about this, or you're not taking it seriously enough. You know, you get it, don't you? That's the kind of, you know, all around the world, that was the kind of advice we were given. We better be thinking hard about this, because if we're not thinking hard about it, we're not taking, you know, the topic or subject seriously enough, or life seriously enough. And there's an innocence to that, because the total opposite is true. The less we think about something, the less we get fixated on something, the easier life gets, and how anxiety alleviates. I remember being at secondary school, and I was one of those kids that couldn't really get good grades unless I studied hard. Periods, I couldn't just wing it like other kids seem to be able to do, and that used to baffle me. Other kids just seemed to not really study or revise, do the exam, and get, you know, top dog grades. Whereas I'd really study hard, and I'd only really get mediocre grades back. You know, D's, C's, B's, no higher than B pluses. You know, I was all right with that, but it just used to baffle me. It used to blow my mind how I used to study so hard. And by the way, I could only get those type of grades. I said I got if I studied. If I wasn't studying, I'd probably end up getting D's, E's, F's, fail. You know, whatever the education system was, and so on. Other kids just seem to barely revise and be able to, you know, get top grades. Why do we think that is? Well, if you really think about it, the answer's kind of obvious. If you're thinking about something, you know, chronically, like I probably was about the exam, oh, this stress of the exam, it's a 2-hour exam, I can't write very well, you know, what the question's going to be, am I going to pass, and so on and so on and so on. I was doing a lot of thinking about studying and the exam, whereas other kids would probably have less thinking about it. And the irony is they did better because they weren't burdened by the pressure of doing an exam. It was like water off a duck's back for them. You could probably relate to it too. Or you could relate to it yourself if you were one of those kids. You probably didn't really think, if you got good grades at school, you probably didn't really think or stress about it too much. You were relaxed. And it paid off for you because you did the exam and you passed with flying colours. Whereas other people who really, really think about the syllabus and really getting bogged down by the pressure of it, probably didn't do too bad, but it didn't do great either. And I was one of those kids. And it's all innocence. Like I say, we were taught from an early age at school to study hard and, you know, revise. You better be thinking about this, or you're not taking it seriously enough. And, you know, the total opposite is true. The less we think about it, to allow space, allow that empty space we have by not thinking about something much, to come with wisdom and, you know, you know, that's just an example about being young and being, you know, back at school and doing exams again. That works for everything, you know. If you're chronically thinking about work, it's the same thing. If you allow room for wisdom to enter your mind, it alleviates stress and anxiety, it brings fresh ideas. Your relationships with people, your colleagues, your family will go through the roof, you know. They'll go to other levels you could never have dreamed of. The human potential is endless if we understand how the mind actually works. Our world gets quite small if we're being strangled by, you know, thoughts, and that's not particularly helpful for us. So let's just recap of what we've discussed on this podcast audio recording so far. As I said before in previous videos, if you prefer the YouTube versions, the video versions of these recordings, I'll be putting these on YouTube also, just so you're aware. So let's just recap on what we've discussed. So we are thinking beings, we are conscious beings. We can't have an experience of life without being conscious. Consciousness allows us to have an experience of life, moment to moment, every moment of a day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 or 366 days a year, depending on if it's a leap year or not. And when we develop a real deep understanding of thought, of consciousness, that can help you alleviate your anxiety. You raise your level of understanding in life, you raise your level of understanding of thought and consciousness, you will just thrive naturally, because thriving naturally is your true nature. Feeling good is your birthright. Feeling good via a tranquil, neutral, blank canvas mind, which you can fill with experience, is your birthright. You weren't designed to live. You weren't designed to live. If you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling stressed, it doesn't matter what it's about, but what you think it's about. But if you're feeling those things, you weren't born in this world to go to that hotel, if you want to say that metaphor. You weren't designed to go to a hotel that was a nightmare, basically, that was full into bits, that was, served rubbish food, that, had noisy guests. All that is just a metaphor, by the way. I'm not talking about hotels or criticising, the hospitality industry. What I'm trying to say is, you weren't designed for a life of misery, no matter what your circumstances are. I've said before, your circumstances have nothing to do with your psychological experience. You weren't designed to survive. You weren't designed to suffer. You were designed to thrive, my friend. You were designed to, do great things. You were designed to feel good. You were designed to, connect with other people. You were designed to be an abundance of joy and love. You weren't designed for chronic stress and, being at the mercy of an experience. You were designed for a hell of a lot more for yourself. Yeah. It's all innocence. As I said before, we were brought up to think hard. We were brought up to study hard. We were brought up to, think and analyse problems. That was the way to solve them. Whereas the bang opposite is really true. The more you take a step back from the thinking you give to problems, the right answer and the right step will just naturally unfold for you. How about you think about it? I've said this before in a previous YouTube short as well, I think. How many times have you been through life? You're watching this video now, and I presume you're hopefully quite present and open to the wisdom and, of the wisdom of discussion I'm trying to bring to you here as the listener. Hopefully quite present now and relaxed. Hopefully, yeah, you are. Okay, great. I'll carry on then. So you're hopefully present and relaxed listening to this audio recording right now. How many times in your previous life experience, from the minute you were born to this point listening to this audio recording, have you got through a problem? Got through a storm? You've done it several times, and you're going to do it several times again. Now, you can do it the easy way or you can do that the easy way or the hard way. The hard way is to do those thought storms with a lot of lack of understanding, a lot of being at the mercy of people, to circumstances, to life, to the mercy of your thinking, your aggravated thinking. Or you can do it the easier way, which is developing a higher understanding of how life and the mind really works. And, if you're hitting a physical problem out there, that's being made even harder by a lot of, heavy metal noise that's going on in your mind about it. that you'll probably get to where you want to get to, but you'll be getting there in a a Flintstones car, which, you know, remembering the Flintstones back in the day. Older listeners will probably relate to this more than, you know, any younger listeners. But the Flintstones used to drive a car with their feet to get to places. Now, you could look at that the same way. You can get to where you need to get to via an uncomfortable car, where you've got to drive it via your bare feet on a tarmac road. That's going to be so uncomfortable. Or you can do it via a petrol engine car. That's going to, with a little bit of foot on the gas pedal, going to get you there with a lot more ease. You know, that's developing an understanding of thought and consciousness. The more you understand how life really works via, you know, we're using our minds to create experience. If you understand that, rather than believe the illusion that the outside world is creating your experience, you're going to get to places via the petrol car rather than the Flintstones car, with a lot more ease, a lot more grace, and you'll just fly through life more like a butterfly rather than, you know, rather than on a, I guess I'll use the hamster that's in the room with me now, rather than a hamster on the hamster wheel, just kind of, you know, going nowhere until they realise they need to stop being on the hamster wheel. Developing an understanding of your consciousness and thought and your relationships to thought is going to get you to places you could never dream of. Whereas a lack of understanding, you know, you bump into a lot along the way, a lot of hurdles. You know, life is really quite simple, and this understanding is quite simple as well. If we understand how it's working in the outside world, there's always an obvious thing to do, whether that's talking to that individual, whether that's leaving that job, whether that's applying for a new job, whether it's talking to your boss. There's always, you know, whether it's staying in the job because of, you know, just some temporary illusory thinking that you've got going on. There's always an obvious next step to do for us in life. Whether it's go to a food bank, whether that's go to the supermarket to buy food, there's always an obvious next step in our outside world. And understanding consciousness and thought can help you a lot with that, because the two aren't linked as we seem to believe they are. You know, if you understand that, oh, my thinking is just, you know, a festival of people, a group of people going to a festival making noise, the festival's going to end. That's absolutely huge. I'm not, you know, when I say that thought and circumstances aren't related, which is true, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be, you know, improving your external circumstances if you can do, you know. That would be silly. If you have a chance to get to a bigger flat for the same, you know, rent price, that's going to help you massively. You know, it would be, you know, if you've got a chance to go to a new flat for the exact same rent that's got a lot more square footage than you have at the moment, then, you know, you probably should go for that. You know, I'm not saying you shouldn't, or if you've got a better job opportunity to get to, not saying you shouldn't leave that job to go to a better job. What I'm trying to point to is that, you know, that out there and the relationship with your thinking is not related. So if you can understand that when your thinking quiets down, you can make better choices that influence the outside world, that's a game changer for you, and you'll flow through life a lot more effortlessly. I won't ramble on particularly anymore. I hope I've made the point I wanted to make quite clear on this episode 3 of this podcast recording. So, I created a little thing called Thought with me, Luke Richardson. Episode 3, Consciousness Can Alleviate Your Anxiety. Developing a higher level of understanding of thought and consciousness can help you with your mental issues that you have going on in your mind. I can help you make better decisions in the outside world as well. Take care. I'll see you on the next recording. Thank you.